8:30. This time yesterday, everyone was saying Boris Johnson would get a flea in his ear when he met Angela Merkel in Berlin in the evening. Well, he didn't, not quite. When he told her there was no way he would accept the backstop, a crucial part of the withdrawal agreement, of course, she did not say, in that case, there's no deal. She said, in that case, come up with something else, but you've only got 30 days in which to do it. So now everyone's waiting to see what the second most powerful leader in the EU, President Macron, will tell Mr. Johnson when he meets him in Paris today. Let's talk about that with David Davis, the man who was himself our first Brexit secretary. He did the job for a couple of years. Good morning to you.
Good morning. I guess this is our last tango.
It is, but I promise not to punch you if you don't punch me.
Very good.
Deal. The 30 days thing, are we to take that seriously?
Well, I think it's an indication of Mrs. Merkel's attitude. I mean, there's been stories around for some time, you can't really ground them, that she thinks she made a mistake right back 2 Decembers ago, December before last, when the Irish issue, if you like, the Irish bloc, the backstop and so on, really first surfaced. And she was distracted by her own elections and the aftermath of her own elections. And so she says, didn't pay enough attention. So what you're seeing here is a constructive German approach. Actually, it's probably the best outcome you could have expected from that meeting, because I think I certainly expect him to come away with a flea in his ear today because of timing issues.
But 30 days to do something that we've been unable to do in the last couple of years.
Well, whether it's doable is actually more down to the European Union than it is down to us. So let me give you an example. Right back at the beginning of this process, when I was Brexit Secretary, the Irish customs authorities and our customs authorities were talking to each other on a weekly basis, having weekly meetings and so on, to sort out what we would do to ensure there'd be no hard border, no new establishments on the Northern Irish border. Then that stopped. I mean, it was round about the time that Mr. Varadkar took over. It might have been just before, might have been just after.
In the Republic of Ireland, yeah.
That's right, absolutely. And that stopped. Well, if they mean this, if they really want to get something done in 30 days, then they should start looking at the very, very detailed proposals. There have been a number of them around, which they've always in the past they've dismissed. Magical thinking. Do you remember that phrase?
Well, I do.
All that sort of stuff.
But equally, I also remember that we have been told, I've lost count of the number of times we've been told that at the last minute, if we hold firm, they will give way. They haven't given way, and there is no reason to suspect that Mr. Macron today will give way.
Well, I'm one of those. I mean, right about the beginning, I think it was actually on this programme, I said, it's not the first few years that matter, it's the last few weeks or even.
Well, you did say that,
yeah.
But
we aren't there yet. But this is the point. We aren't there yet. And one of the
you really think that at this stage, after a couple of years of this, of them saying time and every one of them saying time and time again, we will not reopen the withdrawal agreement under any conditions whatsoever, that they will give way?
It's certainly possible. What needs to happen before then? I mean, one of the difficulties, I listened with interest to you yesterday, trying to get Robert Jenrick to use the word collaborate.
Failing, I think.
And failing, of course, you did. And he's a very professional and competent new Secretary of State. But there's a substantive point in what you were asking, which is the European Union's unlikely to actually really commit to that last stage serious negotiation until after they are persuaded that Parliament won't rescue them from it, that Parliament won't actually block no deal or try to have a...
And that's not going to happen.
I think once we get through the September sitting, it'll be clear. And I think it'll be clear that actually Parliament can't block no deal. And I think it'll be clear there's no majority for replacing Boris as Prime Minister. Those two things I think will become clear. And then the game gets very serious, which is why I suspect Mrs. Merkel used 30 days. I suspect she's thinking in her mind, actually, this is going to become really serious in late September, because then the very, very hard part of this comes up. Now, I may be wrong. I mean, bear in mind, this is a negotiation. You can never predict every aspect of a negotiation, but I think it's possible.
And anyway, it presupposes that there is an alternative arrangement, to use that expression, about the backstop that would be acceptable. Yeah. And there isn't.
Well, there is. I mean, there's actually... the 270-page document. Actually, it was drafted by experts, by international trade experts and by customs experts and so on. But it was overseen by Greg Hans and Nicky Morgan. Both of them Remainer they voted for Remain, and yet they both want to get a constructive outcome. And incidentally, it's something like that. That's the nearest thing to what Parliament's voted for.
But it's been rejected by the EU.
Well, wait a minute. I mean, that's why I think the 30 days issue is quite important, because they've never really engaged on the detail of this. They've never engaged and said why they wouldn't have a trusted trader scheme. That's a scheme whereby traders actually have their accounts audited and they get checked in their warehouses either north or south of the border. They've never said why they can't do this. They've never said why they can't do in Ireland what they do in Rotterdam, which is to inspect away from the border.
But the British-Irish Chamber of Commerce, and I'm quoting from their reaction to that exact thing that you just discussed, it's the thing that Greg Hands and Nicky Morgan came up with, they lack credibility in the reality of how all-island trade actually works. Lack credibility.
Well, I don't agree with them. I mean, but
they're the people who are making the decision.
They're not the people who are making the decision. Actually, the people making the decision are a combination.
Every country in the union has to agree.
But that's not the government. That's the Chamber of Commerce, as you say. And I think the other thing to bear in mind in all of this, and we've tried to avoid it right from the beginning, is that this is if this goes to a no deal arrangement, the country that's most in the most difficult position is Ireland itself, not because of the north-south trade, which is actually quite a small fraction, but because the huge amount of their trade that goes east-west comes actually through Britain to the European Union. And all the blood-curdling things have been said about blockages at Calais and so on, which I don't think will happen, but they've been said. If they were true, would impact most on Ireland, not on us. I mean, that's the astonishing thing. So I think there is a lot of motivation there to do something about it. But of course, they'll go the distance. And of course, you must assume that people will take negotiating positions. One of the things that was most aggravating for me is listening to, not you, but the BBC more generally and public media more generally, treat statements from the European Union as though they're statements of fact rather than negotiating stances. And every single thing they say is a negotiation, even down to Mr Hogan's threats of a poisoned atmosphere.
And everything we say is a negotiation.
Well, of course, what our ministers say.
Except that we do not, or the Prime Minister who says whatever it is that has been said, has not had the support of Parliament. And that's the big difference.
Well, look at what Parliament's done in the last year or so. Firstly, it turned down the original Theresa May deal by the biggest majority ever, as I'm afraid I told her would happen. But
what did she say when you told her that?
Well, she didn't agree, and that was the point of my resignation. In fact, I came and talked about that on your programme. That was the first point of call, as it were. But
unlike Boris Johnson, who said regarded the last point of call.
You must interview me on interview him on that, not me on that.
Chance would be a fine thing.
No, that's between you and him. I'm not his agent. I've forgotten the question.
Well, let me ask you: would you vote for a new deal without the backstop?
Yeah, without the backstop, I mean, it depends what's in the rest of the New Deal. But let me just finish the point we were dealing with, which is what Parliament's stance on this is. Parliament has passed two laws, basically the Article 50 Act and the Withdrawal Act, which both say we leave. They have not been able to come up with any alternative that they agree on, anything at all except one. It was what was called the Brady Amendment. And for the sake of your listeners, basically the Brady Amendment was the nearest thing we've got to saying the deal with the alternative arrangements. All right. So it's quite close to what the government is proposing. So I think if the government gets through this 30-day exercise, it's got a pretty good chance of getting it through the Commons, because the Commons mostly don't want no deal. Some of them are very afraid of no deal. And so in parliamentary terms, once we get past September, I think this has the possibility of coming together. It may or may not, but it has a possibility.
But the probability is that we will leave without a deal. Would you agree with that?
I think it's 50-50. I think it's a high probability, as it were.
What do you think that would mean in real terms for people listening at home?
All right. I think there will be some turbulence. There'll be some bumpiness in terms of cross-border traffic and so on.
Because you said in the past, I suspect we're likely to have the odd hiccup.
Yeah, well, no, I actually use the word I use most of the time was turbulence.
You use that as well, but none of it will be anything that a reasonably competent government will not be able to handle.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's precisely what I think. I mean, the Yellowhammer stuff, that's the stuff that was so-called
published at the weekend.
The weekend.
And looked pretty devastated.
Yeah, and it was rubbish. I mean, basically...
Well, it's drawn up by civil servants.
It's drawn up by the Civil Contingencies Unit. I actually got a briefing on it. It was a Privy Council briefing, so I can't tell you the detail of what I was told. But I have to tell you, I was unimpressed. Very unimpressed.
So what are they making it up?
One question I put to them, I'm going to do this in one sentence. One question I put to them, I said, how much have you discussed this with the planning section of DEXU, that's my old department, who had been working on this since July 2016? And there was a silence, from which I deduced the answer was they hadn't. This is the worst case they could think of, basically, and it's the worst case planning they're coming out for. It's not a prediction, it's the worst case that they have.
So is this a civil service conspiracy then?
No. I mean, look, what happened, what you've got here, and I've always resisted these attacks on Ollie Robbins, these attacks on Whitehall and so on.
The man who used to be in charge of
exactly. Oh, yes, the negotiator. I mean, when he was my permanent secretary at one point.
Yep.
Because they're all doing what they think's best for the country. Now, they have a different perspective. I mean, they're basically mostly Remainers from where they come from. So they view this as a risk minimisation exercise. Whereas a leaver, somebody who voted to leave, will be saying, actually, how do we make the most of the opportunities? And one of the problems from Whitehall's point of view is doing his job. It's doing what it ought to do, which is to try to deliver the national interest, but it's doing it in a way which is negative. It's saying, oh, we've got to stop all the risks. Oh, this might go wrong. Actually, some things will go wrong, but they will be manageable.
You cannot possibly know that, can you?
Well, I spent a hell of a lot of time on it. I mean, we had
some people say you didn't spend enough time on it. Some people even said you were a bit lazy.
Oh, really? Yeah, that's why I'm here with this.
Yeah, your briefing notes. I noticed they're blank.
They're blank. They're entirely blank. Look, we spent a lot of time on this. The 300 projects, 125 of them roughly, which are critical, and at any point in time, 10% of them were running late. But that's normal for a big, complex project of this sort of nature. But there will be hiccups. But there are also dynamics in our favour. Last time I was on talking about this subject, I said, look, Dover-Calais are working like mad to make sure that there's a minimum possible friction at their border. The Today programme, quite properly, rushed off to Calais to talk to the head of the port at Calais, who came back and said, indeed, yes, that's certainly true. In fact, I'm insulted that you suggested...
However, the MP for Calais, whom I spoke to an hour ago on this very programme, said the disruption would be in Dover and it would be massive, and therefore that would affect everybody.
Well, I'm afraid he's talking about what he doesn't know about rather than what he does know about. Since if he told you the disruption being in Calais, I'd have to have a problem to deal with. Now, but the thing to bear in mind in all this is, firstly, they want that to happen. The regional head wants it to happen, Xavier Bertrand. But also, there's competition along the Channel ports. And ports like Rotterdam and Zeebrugge and Antwerp are looking at Calais and thinking, well, if they mess it up, we'll take the trade. And about 40% of the trade, if you include both Ro-Ro and that which we converted to container, about 40% of that trade is transferable elsewhere. So, it's that, again, is what I mean by it's manageable.
Should we pay back the 39 billion quid, whether we have a deal or not?
No. I mean, there's been lots of nonsense spoken about this. I mean, the reason
Philip Hammond said we should.
Well, he's wrong.
That's not our legal advice is we're likely to have to have most, if not all.
He's wrong. It'd be quite interesting, so under what rules of the legal advice he was talking, and how it would be arbitrated, and what about the council? I mean, put it in common sense terms for a second, and put the Whitehall lawyers to one side. If, let's say, it was an East European country leaving, all right, one of the recipients of money from the European Union, do you think the European Union would insist that they keep receiving the money?
Well, that's not...
Well, I mean, it's the same legal case. It's exactly the same legal case.
Well,
now, of course...
not really, because we have signed up to this deal, and therefore we are legally obliged, and B, it's much easier to demand money back.
The first and most authoritative view on this, actually, was given by the House of Lords Constitutional Committee, a Remainer outpost.
All right.
And what did they say? No, there's no clear legal guideline here. This is a matter of negotiation. And they're right.
Final quick thought. Did Boris Johnson offer you a job?
No.
That'll do it. Why
not?
Oh, why not?
Well, I don't know. I didn't ask for one. So
there we are. I thought you'd asked to be Foreign Secretary, but maybe that wasn't one of the...
more headlines. You shouldn't believe what you read in the newspapers, John.
David Davis, thank you very much.
Our last tango was very pleasant and neither of us punched each other.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
24 minutes past 8. And on that subject...